For Augusta, it's easy. It's the confessions. You're going to get the confessions. Oh, yeah. For St. Dominic, there's numerous lives of St. Dominic. And if I can't get... Also, everybody will get a life of St. Francis. Everybody get the little flowers of St. Francis. So you'll at least have St. Francis, even if I can't get your obscure saint. Goodness gracious, we're going to pack the library out. Is that what's going to happen? If we pack the library out, we'll go back out there. That's fine with me. But it's practical, and we're going to be going through work, and so I like that it's more intimate. But if it's packed out, it's packed out. Let's see. What other things do I want to do? And what are we early? We just hit 9:30. I'll probably also do readings, some kind of reading every week, short reading of some sort. We're going to work on a psalm, and then we're going to just start to talk about what it is we're doing, how it is we're going to be doing it, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. All right. Mike, do you got anything you want to?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
For everybody that's here, I've been absent for the last couple of weeks. I came down with a really bad bacterial infection, and I kind of resurrected on Easter Sundays. So I'm back in the mix. But anyway, so sorry I missed your baptism and some of the things that happened.
Yeah, well, it's better you get well than that.
Oh yeah, we're in good shape now.
We'll keep, next time we'll just keep a picture up for you, Let's see. What else was there to talk about that I thought was important? Oh, yeah, rosary. So I said have rosary today, but it's just good to have it each time, so I might make reference to it. Probably next week, maybe the week after, we'll begin to talk about doing the rosary. In this part of the course, when I talk about the rosary, I like to talk about, look, what's this for? And why do I do that? Because, look, I've been doing this for a number of years. I've talked to people for many, many years about what they're doing. And I found out a good push people don't even know what the rosary's for and why you're doing it. Like, lots of people do the rosary as, hear these prayers, and I say them, and I say them. Well, I mean, that's verbal prayer, and that's fine on a certain level, but, like, the rosary is a meditative prayer method. If you know what the rosary is, and you don't know what meditative prayer is, that's a problem. It means you have a meditative prayer method and you don't know how to do meditative prayer at all. Who knows what meditative prayer is? Raise your hand. One guy. Two guys? Two people. Three people. Four people. Four people out of less than half the room know what meditative prayer is. Who knows what the rosary is? Okay, so you know what the rosary is, you don't know what it's for. that's the. No, I mean, maybe you know meditative prayer under another name. Mental prayer, mental prayer. Okay, so you do know the idea of mental prayer. Mental prayer is meditative prayer, same thing. Okay, all right, very good. But we'll talk about how mental prayer works in general, and how the rosary is a mental prayer in a particular way, and how to engage with the rosary as mental prayer. All right. That's usually so. Next week we talk about verbal prayer, mental prayer, and contemplative prayer. That's what we go over next week. But when I get to mental prayer, I begin to talk about the rosary as this particular case. And then I begin to talk about how do we deepen our engagement with the rosary as a particular case of mental prayer. But we don't only have to use the rosary as mental prayer, but it's a case par excellence. Also, I talk about how we'll do verbal prayer, etc., etc. Let's see, what else do we have that I go over while we're doing this? Let's see. Thank you.
I don't know.
Oh.
Do you need it?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
You name your saint and your mass.
Yeah, which kind of mass you're going to.
Oh, okay.
So what your name, is particular saint of devotion, so like confirmation or baptism or whatever. And then which mass you go to. Because I've got books to help guide people through this spiritual side of the mass, but they're a little different for each mass. Just a little. The fundamentals are the same. Let's see, what else? So not next session, but next session, we go over prayer, usually. Session after that, how do we have them divided on the thing? Do you remember?
On the
Let me look it up.
on our
He
regular.
has a schedule.
Yeah, let me see how because I sent it in there. So I've got it as introduction. That's what we're doing right now. Mental prayer, frequent confession. Okay. Holy Communion and Eucharistic adoration, sacred study, scripture and spiritual reading, Mary of the Saints and devotions, stewardship and handing on the faith. All right. So it's a little complicated because the core book I work through is this with some additions. There'll be many more books than this, but consider this the textbook for the course with some supplements. Introduction to Mystagogy is what we're doing right now, where I talk about what we're going to be doing and why we're doing it. Mental prayer, it says mental prayer, but I'm going to cover prayer in general. And then mental prayer in particular will take up a lot of the time. Frequent confession. So frequent confession will be on the point of frequent confession, and I have a book on that I'll give you. But we're actually going to talk about the moral life in general. So that's to say basically what you need to be doing so that you can really be doing frequent confession. And then frequent confession is sort of at the end. So more I'm going to be talking about, look, we talked about examining your conscience earlier. But like, you know, stuff like what's your major fault? You know, like how are you going to actually make spiritual progress in the moral life? Like, what are you actually going to be doing? What are you going to be looking for? Like, how are you going to be guiding yourself through this? How are you going to be improving yourself? How are you going to be then utilizing confession to help you to get, you know, to make spiritual progress, to become more holy? That's what we'll do on that lesson. Holy Communion and Eucharistic adoration. So I'll of course, we'll talk about reception of communion, but I usually use Holy Communion and Eucharistic adoration to talk about liturgical spirituality and liturgical prayer. So you'll have already been prepared on prayer in general. You'll have already been prepared on meditation. You'll have already been prepared on vocal prayer next week. Then we'll start to talk about, okay, what kind of prayer is liturgical prayer? And as I've talked about conceptually what it is you're doing upstairs in the Mass, but sort of how do I go through it? How do I work on it? And I'll give you a number of books and we'll talk about it. Mary of the Saints and devotions. So, sacred study, scripture and spiritual readings, and then I kind of tie that to the saints. So, I begin to talk about Lectio Divina. So that's how to read scripture. But when I start talking about Lectio Divina, I pull it back into the Mass because guess what? We read scripture, man. So the stuff that you're doing in Lectio applies to stuff you're doing in Mass. These things all connect together, and of course, all that connects back to the moral life, and all of that connects back to mental prayer and all that. So we're going to start knitting all this together into a piece. And then, of course, we're also talking about reading Lives of the Saints, spiritual writings, etc., etc. And then stewardship and handing on the faith. That's usually where I begin to talk about evangelization. So we'll have taken all of the, because a big part of evangelization is example and counsel and being able to talk to other people and being able to talk to other people about the faith. And when you're talking to other people about the faith, you have to at least show some kind of fruit of the faith. I mean, you can evangelize people like you're taking them to a day club and we all hang out here. That exists, but that's not really the point. I mean, you want people to, in a certain way, see Christ through and in you in some way and to bring them to Christ. And so you're going to have to gather up everything we've worked on till then, and then we begin to talk about evangelization, and then we begin to talk about, how to talk to other people, how to comport ourselves to evangelize to other people, how to spread the faith, and what's the point, and the spiritual aspect of that, etc. All right, does that kind of make sense? Did anyone want to ask any questions about any of this? Go ahead.
I was wondering if when we go through everything on confession, are we going to talk about what exactly the priest is processing and what they're... Because I was talking to someone about that, and that sometimes, once you're absolved and you feel like, you should have more, should have been assigned more things you should do for your sins, that sometimes the priests will take that on themselves and do a...
Yeah, I mean, they're all up there. They're praying for us all the time.
But are they, when we're up to be absolved, are the priests just taking all that you unloaded as their own to work through? I mean, you see where I'm going with that?
I mean, some priests, I've never spoken with the priests on this topic, and you'd have to talk to them about it. Some priests might do penance for you. I don't see why they wouldn't.
Oh, okay. I just wondered if part of the process, with these priests, what they're.
The thing about penance is, you can do penance for you, and you can do penance for someone else. We're all in the communion of the saints in a certain way. We all do spiritual things for one another. So, you say pray for one another. Well, why? Because in a certain way that does spiritual work for other people. But it's the same thing for all of the other spiritual acts. In a certain way you can give alms for other people. You can't follow the commandments for another person in the sense that it would make them holy.
Yeah.
But you can, in a certain way, merit the grace that they would merit were they to do it, and then ask that it be applied to them.
Let me say that, in a sense, you're getting into the area of indulgences as well.
Yeah.
When you're talking about that. And one of the things that we can and should do, and are responsible to do once we become part of this Catholic Universal Church, all right, is to pray for those who may need that prayer, whether they know it or not, who have entered into eternity. So the thing about praying now, I can pray for my ancestors. I can pray for my good friends, my immediate family, because when you pray in that way, you're getting into eternity. Eternity doesn't have a time limit before or after. So you can. I pray, for example, a good friend of mine who was a priest and who left very angrily. Had a lot of problems, and so I pray for him, even though he's gone now for 20-some years. I pray that he will have that he will open himself up to Christ at that moment in eternity. See, it's kind of hard for us to think because we think linearly.
Yeah.
But in that sense, and so you can pray for others who are living, but indulgences can be only for you or for those who have passed on. Every time I go to Mass, I offer that Mass. I make sure that I've confessed within 2 weeks. I think it's 3 weeks now. I pray for the Holy Father, do all the intentions of indulgence, and then I offer that for a specific person. So I go right down through my family, which I've gone through a few times, and I started to do this once I realized that some time ago. So I'm getting off into a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's important to realize in
I was
relation
just
to your
thinking
question.
about the life of priests, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And I guess every time, their whole life is just dedicated to.
I keep meaning to get a priest down here and just let you grill the man, but but our priests are very busy. Okay, let's do a little work on. We'll start to do a little work on Psalm 1, but first we'll pray. Let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Ineffable Creator, who from the treasures of your wisdom have established 3 hierarchies of angels, have arrayed them in marvelous order above the fiery heavens, and marshaled the regions of the universe with such artful skill. You are proclaimed the true font of light and wisdom, and the primal origin raised high beyond all things. Pour forth a ray of your brightness into the darkened places of my mind. Disperse from my soul the twofold darkness into which I was born, that is sin and ignorance. You make eloquent the tongues of infants, refine my speech, and pour forth upon my lips the goodness of your blessing. Grant to me keenness of mind, capacity to remember, skill in learning, subtlety to interpret, and eloquence in speech. May you guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to completion. You who are true God and true man, who live and reign, world without end. Amen. Let's sit. All right, to try to memorize this, I'm going to try to do the list. I'm going to try to do a listening method. So the way this will work is I'll give you a verse, or I'll give you a line. So first of all, I'm using the Abbey Psalms and Canticles. I'm using the Abbey Songs and Canticles because when we reform the Missal again, this will be the edition of the Psalms that will be used. It's not what we use now, but it's what we will use. I would do Latin, but who here can actually hear Latin? That is to say, if I spoke to you and you'd hear it like I spoke to you in English. Anybody?
I could make out like some of it.
Some of
Bits and pieces. Words.
If you want to memorize things in Latin, and you tell me that, you have to show me that you can understand it. If you don't, I won't do that with you. For a lot of reasons. Not because I don't like the language, but because you need to, you need to be able to think with God. And so I start with English. I have nothing in Latin. Nothing against Latin. I go up to 12 pretty frequently. But you need to know what all that means. And I'll tell you this again when we go to liturgy. If you go to Latin Mass and you don't know what any of that means, know what it means. And if you've been going and you don't know what it means, know what it means. The English Mass takes that away from you, but then I'm just going to tell you, okay, you know what those words mean. Now, what does that mean? Okay? And we're not doing, a book report or anything. It's not that kind of thing. But I mean, do you think about it? You're supposed to be up there in a certain way praying the Mass. How can you pray something you don't know what you're doing? You can't. It's important. Like, in a certain way, Christ came down to this earth, and he dwelled with the disciples for 3 years, and he's a rabbi. It's complicated. You want to say it's a teaching relationship, but he's not a mere professor. It's a lived teaching relationship. He's living a life here on earth with these disciples. And so it's a discipline. It's a way. It's a way of living. And if you're with Christ, but you're not living in, it's not happening. If that makes a certain sense, you have to do the work. It's like, it's at least as much as a job. If you show up to work, and you show up to the building, and you sit down in the chair, and you don't do anything, what happens? You get fired, in a certain way. You're at work, but you're not at work. Understand what I'm saying? It's the same way with the faith. You might show up to the building, you might say the words, you might go through the motions, but if you're not here, you're not here. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by actually living into the thing. All right, now here's how this is going to work. I'm going to say a line, and then you will repeat it. And then I'll say the next line, and then you'll repeat it. And then I'll say the next line, and then you'll repeat it. And then, after so they've got them broken up into chunks. So that's what they consider units. And so then we get to the bottom of a unit. I'll do the whole thing, and then you'll do the whole thing. And we'll do that every week until I don't think you have to look at this anymore. Or at least I don't think you have to hear me anymore. Does that make sense? All right. And I'm going to say it I'm just going to say it, in prose. I'm going to say it out loud, just in plain words now. I might chant it later. But I'd rather you not have to learn to sing at the same time when we start. Blessed indeed is the man, who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night. I'm going to do the whole unit, and then we'll see what you can do afterward. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night. Okay. Let's try it. So, but
we do like two at a time.
Yeah. But I want to point something out to you. Okay, this is the method. This is part of why I'm doing this. This is the method that's presupposed upstairs when you do the liturgy. You understand? You understand that they read those readings to you every time. They expect you to hear them and retain them. Not rote, but enough. You understand? We'll do it by twos. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked,
Nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners.
nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners.
But whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
Whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and ponders his law day and night.
Okay, good. That's two at a time. I don't think we can get the whole thing, so I'm going to just work on the first unit. Let's see if we get the first unit by the time we're done. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the path of the sinners.
All right. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, but doesn't stand.
Follows not the path, but stands in the counsel of what?
But doesn't stand in the path.
Nor stands in the
Or doesn't
path.
stand in the path.
Nor stands in the path with sinners.
Counsel of wicked.
Might help to chant it.
Let's try it one more time in prose, and then we'll see.
I'm gonna have to get a brain supplement.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path of the sinners.
Good.
The path of sinners or with sinners?
Path with sinners.
Sinners.
Good. Nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
What's the first part?
Nor.
Okay.
Nor who abides in the company of scorners. Okay, I'll do the whole thing.
Okay.
No, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
Or who abides in the company of sinners.
Scorners.
But who delights in the
Lights
law
in
of the
the
Lord.
Lord's day and night.
And who
Okay,
abides by the law day and night? Who abides with it?
okay, here, this is a,
Ponders.
Multiple choice of this.
Ponders on the law.
this is fun. So hook on, when you do it, hook on the keywords a little bit.
I need to read the word. Yeah.
No, well, yeah, that's the problem.
Well, that's the thing.
That you need to be able to read them.
Yeah.
Remember, we have a listening method. Liturgy's a listening method.
Okay.
You can bring the.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
But stop it. In a certain way. I mean, look. It's fine as an aid. It's fine as an aid. But in a certain way, you're supposed to hear it from the lector. You're supposed to hear it from the priest. All right? So, this is the thing. This is the thing I'm trying to do because, the point is, the council wanted participation, liturgical participation. How are you going to do that when you're reading a book? You understand what I'm saying?
So you want us to, you're training us to
Hear it.
hear it.
Hear it.
To train our memory to hear.
Yeah, at least on a basic level. On a basic level. Not.
To use our hearing to memorize instead of sight.
Yeah. So the trick of the song, the trick I'm pulling on you is two things. One, I'm trying to trick you into being able to listen. But second, if you actually pick up the Psalms, you've got a large part of the liturgical repertoire in your head already. So you're already there. You don't have to go, what do they say? You go, oh, I know that one. So then you'll be able to, it's this thing. You're in the Mass. The question is, how do I make you all begin to be able to make liturgical connections? How do I make you all begin to make connections between all these things? Well, part of it is you already have some of it in your heart. And you start to put things together. Like the glue that sticks most of the liturgy together is the Psalms, if you didn't know that. But how are you gonna know how that's doing that? Well, one of two ways. You either have to be so good with the book that you look at it and go, oh, that's all the themes of that, and I have an index. Or you know it well enough to know how it's in it. And then you start to see how the stuff's put together. And we don't do this just for exercise. This isn't just an academic thing. Look, you want to have spiritual thoughts? You want to have God talk to you spiritually? You want to have God direct your life? Well, it has to be knit together. It has to be knit together. The liturgy has to knit together with your life. All right? But if you can't even knit the liturgy itself together, the liturgy's not going to knit together with your life. It's not going to have any impact on your prayer. It's not going to have any impact on your existence. So you have to start to see the connection between the liturgy and your life. You have to start to see the connection. The same thing. Protestants practice the same thing, but in a different way. You have to start to see the connection between Scripture and your life. But how are you going to do that if it's not in your heart? You're going to go out in the life and you're going to get a Bible index and look up the passage? No. It is a certain way, not memorized as in rote, but a certain way it already has to be in here. But how do we begin to do that? We begin to have to hear. And a certain way, we start with Scripture. We begin to hear God here. We begin to hear God in His Word. And then He begins to speak to us more. But you have to begin with hearing. All right. Again. Go ahead.
I mean, but we're talking about in order to get there, we have to do the process of memorization. You have to learn it. I don't know the words to a song, even a song I really like, until I hear it several times, and then I start to.
Yeah, I mean that it is certain.
What we're doing.
That is what we're doing. But again, I don't want to. There's the other wrong way to go. You teach, you know this.
Yeah.
The other wrong way to go is rote memorization.
Maybe you should sing it to us.
One second. Let me try a tone. Let me see if that helps. Let me see what.
Lights in the law, Lord.
Psalm. 1 second.
Psalm 1, Gregorian chant.
1 second.
Tone 8. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked.
Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked,
Nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners.
nor abides in the path of sinners, nor
Stands in the company of scorners.
But whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
Delights in the law of the Lord, and ponders His law day and night.
I'll try the whole section to see how that works. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night.
Much better.
Much better.
Okay.
It comes easier.
Again. Blessed indeed is the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the path with sinners, nor abides in the company of scorners, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who ponders his law day and night. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll give you a break. We'll work on it. We'll try it again next week. We'll see if we get the first section.
We do like a quiz.
Can we like do
see if you can write it all
it at the
down.
end of
Yeah,
class again?
But it just
Musical notes.
The-
You can write X through it.
well, some of the point of the listening method is also to try to get you off road. Because I went to school and I know what happened. Cram. We're right back on the test. You'll get the test next week when I see if you retained any of it. That's when you get it. Also, if you're tired, get a coffee. That'll help.
What do you put in this coffee, by the way? Is there like clove flavoring or something in
I
there?
do basically the equivalent of pumpkin pie spice in mine.
Okay, yeah.
If you don't like it, have Mike make it.
Well, I just
Well, I
like
have
it.
each. I mean, you have the
That
one,
one's
and the other
Mike's.
one is just plain white.
All right. So then, what I
I
do?
don't know your formula.
Yeah. Well, it's just throw some cloves on it, throw some cinnamon on it, throw some nutmeg on it. That's the formula. Stir it up.
That probably lowers cholesterol, doesn't it?
I'm going to read from a couple of things. Let's see. How long is the life of Francis?
You pass the coffee down. Yeah.
You want the clove one or the?
No.
Or what do you want, the regular one?
let's do
All right. The clove coffee. I think it's that one. Yeah, it's that one.
I'll do the regular.
I'm going to read from a couple other things. So, probably not the life of St. Francis today. It's a little long. I'm going to read from, so this is a book called The Bestiary of Christ. This is about, I have several books like this, but I like this because, so a couple of things I try to awaken. I try to awaken your memory, a very primitive psychological thing you need to use. I also try to awaken your imagination. So this is one of the better books for that. You can also do the Lives of the Saints. The Lives of the Saints are great because you have to think about guys going around and doing stuff. You know, that's the big difference. So like this is important for me because I'm a philosophy and like dogmatic theology guy. So I think in propositions. My head's like a bunch of geometry and stuff. But that's not helpful for a lot of people. And in fact, if I want to teach anybody any of that, I have to start to put it into images and thoughts and concrete things. And so for me, it's a question of putting these things into lived vessels. For most people, it's a question of, I need to see this in lived vessels first. And so, but in either case, you have to exercise the memory, you have to be able to look at it and retain it. And you have to be able to imagine it. You have to be able to see it in the mind's eye in a certain way. So I like this book because it's sort of, what it focuses on is, in the Christian faith, it focuses on angels and creatures that are important. So we're going to, and I'll show you, you'll see how it starts to work. We're starting with the tetramorph, and here I'm going to. It's just a couple of pages. So here and here, pass this around real quick. Flip the page, and then get it back around to me, so you can see the image. It's the image of the. It's that angel with the four heads of the lion, the eagle. What's the
Four disciples.
Yeah, no, I know that, but it's that's
Yeah.
it. The ox and the man.
Yeah.
I always forget the ox. That probably reveals some character fault in me. It probably reveals some character fault in me that I'll convict myself of when we get to the ox.
I know the cathedral has that in the four corners of the dome.
It's Ezekiel, isn't it? I saw the.
Yeah,
Yeah. It'd probably be in there.
Ezekiel's very interesting.
And the wheels and the.
Uh-huh.
Thanks, Lassie.
I remember when I was a kid, I thought that he was envisioning like modern machines.
Well, that when I was a
As a
kid.
little kid, I was like, wow, he's seeing helicopters and he doesn't realize it.
When I was a kid, it's UFOs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like it. I mean, you know.
Here, I'll do it. In the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the river Chebar, I saw a vision of God, etc., etc. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness round it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming bronze, and from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the form of men, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and thus the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. They went every one straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likeness of their faces, each had the face of a man in front. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle at the back. Such were their faces, and their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wings of another, while 2 covered their bodies, and each went straight forward. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. In the midst of the living creature there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving back and forth among the living creatures, and the fire was bright. And out of the fire went forth lightning, and the living creatures darted back and forth like a flash of lightning. And then it talks about the wheels. I don't think that covers the wheel. The tetramorph. In the series of living beings claimed by Christian symbolism to form the mysterious crown of Christ, a group of 4 animals is notable for the large place it held and continues to hold in sacred art and in mystical literature. We see them represented at times separately from one another, and at times united, blended together in the form of a unique being that would be strange indeed and disconcerting to anyone ignorant of ecclesial symbolism. These celestial animals are the ones that the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel, towards the end of the 7th century BC, and the evangelist St. John in the first years of the church saw come to life in visions, of which they have left us extraordinary and troubling accounts: the lion, the ox, the eagle, and man. They form what sacred art has named the tetramorph, the 4 forms. These are the words of Ezekiel. Now it came to pass, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw the visions of God. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, as we had read. And now St. John. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal. And in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind. And the first beast was like a lion, and the second beast like a calf, and the third beast had the face of a man, and the 4th beast was like a flying eagle. And the 4 beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within. And they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. In St. John, as in Ezekiel, these 4 animals, or rather these 4 living creatures, are the epitome of creation, because of all creatures they are the noblest. We shall see how man, lion, ox, or bull, and eagle were taken to represent Christ symbolically, and how the Christian arts placed them around him to represent the 4 evangelists who have transmitted to us his story and his teaching. Let me see. How long do they go on about the lion? A little too long for this day. None are short. The man. Do a little bit. The lion. The king, behold the king. The first of those 4 kings, whom God disclosed to the dazzled eyes of Ezekiel on the banks of the Chebar, and whom St. John recognized in his resplendent vision on Patmos, when they sang before the throne of the sovereign Lamb, beating their firing wings, the lion, awesome king of the beasts, the ox, king of sacrificial victims, the eagle, king of the air, and man, king of the world. Yet this lion of the prophets of Israel, sovereign though he was only a servant. That is why, together with the man, the eagle, and the ox, he stood transfixed with love and adoration, acclaiming the one who occupied the throne, by turns lion and lamb, the one whom John saw ascend to the divine seat, there to open the book sealed with 7 seals. But many centuries before the time that John rested his head on the Master's heart and felt the Spirit descend upon him, the pre-Christian traditions of Europe, Africa, and Asia surrounding Israel and its religion had adopted the image of the lion to represent what they believed to be the various attributes of divinity. Among the Egyptians, the goddess Sekhmet proudly bore a lion's head. Among the Ammonites, the sun was adored under the name of Kamos, the lion son, and in Syria, as we shall see later on, the royal animal had also a divine character. For millennia, Tibet had worshipped Ka-Gorma, goddess with the head of lioness, like Sekhmet of Egypt, divinely beautiful, who danced naked upon the corpses of conquered men and animals. Among the Greeks, 4 harnessed lions drew the chariot of Cybele, at a stringing gallop or pacing majestically. Cybele, mother of the gods, the good goddess, image of the divine bounty, which gives humanity all the good things which come forth from the earth. In Persia, the lion was one of the animals sacred to the cult of Mithra. The feasts of this god were called the Leonic rites, and often on the sculptures which depict Mithra sacrificing the bull, the lion, and the serpent are shown lying underneath the slain animal. In Mithrandic mysteries, initiates of the 4th order were called lions and lionesses, and Mithra himself, the invincible sun, seems to have been sometimes personified by a lion-headed god. The lion also lends his claws to the Sphinx, and his body to the griffin, saving them a part of his nature and of the qualities which are attributed him, that are royalty, power, watchfulness, courage, and justice. Of these attributes, royalty and power. No doubt, this was why Alexander the Great, and after him Maximilian Hercules, Probus, Galileus, and other rulers, appeared on their coins hooded with the skin of a lion's head. Strength and courage. Over and above the Mithrandic influence, this accounts for the lion's adaptation as insignia by the Legion of Rome. Watchfulness. The age-old belief sanctioned as well by classical Latin authorities, which shows the lion sleeping in the desert with his eyes wide open, day or night, must surely have seemed significant to the first Christian symbolists. What did it matter to them whether the alleged facts were true or not? St. Augustine, in commenting on a rather strange characteristic attributed to the eagle, tells us that in symbolism, the important thing is to consider the significance of a fact and not to dispute its authenticity. Thus, Christian idealism of bygone days always and in everything paid heed to the symbol and not to the thing, to the spirit which gives life and not to the letter which sucks dry. So it sees in the perpetually open-eyed lion the image of the attentive Christ, who sees everything and who guards souls from evil when they truly wish, like a watchful pastor, a good shepherd. Here the Far East is in agreement with Western and Christian Middle Ages in seeing the lion as a vigilant guardian, since what long-vanished epoch have granite lions, crouched and ferocious, like those of Angkor Wat, stood guard in the company of fearsome dragons at the threshold of India's temples? For the symbolists of Asia, as for those of the West, lions and dragons never shut their eyes. They would say with our Bruno Latini, all lions of every kind keep their eyes open even while they sleep. William of Normandy, who wrote his Divine Bestiary at the beginning of the 13th century, also underlines the symbolic character of the watchful lion and gives the following interpretation. When the lion sleeps, his eye watches. In sleep, his eyes are open, clear and gleaming, and awake. Now he adds, we must understand what this means. When this lion was put on the cross by the Jews, his enemies, who judged him so wrongfully, his humanity suffered death. Then, when he rendered the spirit from the body and fell asleep on the holy cross, but the divine nature kept watch. And here the ancient poet is in accord with St. Hilary and St. Augustine, who see in the lion's way of sleeping an allusion to Christ's divine nature, which was not extinguished in the sepulchre, even while his humanity underwent a real death. Justice. For the ancients used to say that the lion will attack his prey only if he is compelled by an urgent need for food, and that even then he will never pounce upon a foe who has fallen before the battle can begin. It was also said that the lion knew how to show appreciation for a favor to the point where he might teach humans some useful lesson in gratitude. The Middle Ages maintained the connections which had previously linked the lion to the idea of justice. From Italy up to the Loire, ecclesiastical courts were often held in the forecourts of churches between stone lions, which framed the portico, and judgments were handed down there in accordance with the well-known expression, inter leones et coram populo, between the lions and before the assembled people. One can still see one of these four courts of justice, flanked by weather-beaten lions, at the grand portal of the church of St. Rigogard in Poitiers, and lions appear again at the threshold of several ancient churches in Rome, at St. Lawrence outside the walls, at the Church of the 12 Apostles, at St. Lawrence in Lucinia, and at St. Saba. The concept which links the lion to the virtue of justice is supported in Christian symbolism by the Bible's description of Solomon's throne of justice, made of ivory and gold, which rested in 6 steps guarded by 12 magnificent lions. The lion was also an emblem of the resurrection. Emile of Maul explains a stained glass window in the Cathedral of Bourges, which shows a symbolic lion near the tomb of the risen Christ, by recalling the tradition which made the lion in Christian art an emblem of Christ as the risen God-man. Malle writes, in the Middle Ages, everyone subscribed to the idea that the lioness brought forth young which appeared to be stillborn. For 3 days the lion cubs would give no sign of life, but on the 3rd day the lion would return and animate them with his breath. The authors of the bestiaries of the Middle Ages certainly found this legend in Aristotle and in Pliny the Elder, yet Plutarch, better informed about the Orient and its creatures, had written that, on the contrary, lion cubs come into the world with their eyes wide open, and for that reason certain peoples of his time consecrated the lion to the sun. This would also explain the lion's presence alongside Mithra, the Sol Invictus. Although Cuvier and the modern naturalists confirm Plutarch's opinions, the authors and artists of the Middle Ages, relying on the scant authority of Origen and the physiologists, followed the opposite view. In such a thoroughly idealistic world which sought to consecrate every truth by means of symbols, the fable of the lion cubs born dead and brought to life on the 3rd day by their father enjoyed a great vogue. It was favored by St. Ephanius, St. Anselm, St. Ivo of Chartres, St. Bruno of Ostia, and many others. As Malle puts it, the apparent death of the little lion represented the sojourn of Jesus Christ in the grave, and this birth was like an image of the resurrection. William of Normandy in his Divine Bestiary might be translated as follows. When the lioness gives birth, her cub drops to earth dead. He lacks the force of life, until the father on the 3rd day breathes on him and licks him for love. In this way he breathes life into him. No other remedy could save him. So it was with Jesus Christ, the humanity which he assumed, and cloaked himself in for love of us, suffered pain and labor for us, of which his divinity felt nothing. Believe thus, and you will do well. When God was put into the tomb, he stayed only 3 days, and on the 3rd day again received his breath from the Father who roused him, just as the lion breathes life into his little cub. And the custom which prevailed before Christianity in Lycia and Persia, as well as several other regions, of placing the image of the lion on the tombs of kings or illustrious heroes, might have its source in part in the fabled power of resurrection, which the ancients attributed to the lion. In the art of antiquity, his image often accompanies the palm tree, which throughout the ancient world was an emblem of resurrection, still more than of the desert. The union of Jesus Christ, of two natures, human and divine, has been the theme of many allegorical images, including that of the lion, and it is certainly in the lion that the two are at least visibly differentiated. The ancients were in agreement that all the lion's active qualities were located in his foreparts, in his head, neck, chest, and front claws. For them, the hindquarters served only as the animal's physical support. Thus they made the forequarters of the lion the emblem of Christ's divine nature, and the hindquarters the image of his humanity. Was it not perhaps because of this idea that the heraldic lion, called the lion rampant, was represented lifting himself on his hind legs, with his foreparts turned toward the sky? It's also quite natural that the mystical writers saw an image of the potent speech of Christ in the roar of the lion. The formidable voice which resounds through the immense expanses of the desert served as an image for that of the teacher of the word and his unequaled rage. Hosea prophesied of this matchless voice, saying, "They shall walk after the Lord, he shall roar like a lion. When he shall roar, then the children shall tremble from the west." And Joel in turn said, "The Lord shall also roar out of Zion." Later on, the Latin liturgy would also make use of the same terms in speaking of the Savior. De Zion rejuet, et de Jerusalem dabit vocem suum. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. Perhaps this is why, in our western regions at least, preaching pulpits often are supported by lions. In a French word, near Loudun, Vienne, and in the same city at the Church of Martrey, the pulpits dating from the 15th and 16th centuries are made in the form of stone fonts and rest their base on seated lions. But the lion shares with numerous animals, which are also authentic emblems of Jesus Christ, the negative role of serving equally as an allegorical image for the Antichrist for Satan. Since the dawn of the Church, the lion has had this evil significance quite often on account of St. Peter's words thus: "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour." Frequently in scenes of ancient Christian art, where the lion pursues timid does or innocent gazelles, the onlooker sees only the ordinary pursuit of prey by a famished beast, while in reality these images illustrate the text from St. Peter. Commentators on the sacred books explicitly recognize the image of the devil in the lion vanquished by the young David. The celebrated reliquary of Abbé Bignon, part of the treasure of the ancient 9th century Abbé Cognes and Roger, which was known as St. Vincent Lantern, portrayed David's combat with the lion, and on the damaged inscription beneath this image one can still read thus: "Sic noster David sanctum superavit," thus our David overcame Satan. In his infernal role, the lion is often the emblem of one of the so-called three concupiscences, to which Christian asceticism attributed the downfall of souls. That is, concupiscence of the flesh, whence come lust, gluttony, and sloth; concupiscence of the eyes, whence lust again, greed and envy; concupiscence of the pride of life, whence pride and wrath. In these three filiations, out of the 7 deadly sins, the lion represents pride of life. All right. Why'd I do all that? Why'd I just read that to you? So the point is to begin to see the imagination, the religious imagination, how images move. If you've ever actually picked up the Bible, okay, and I have problems as well in the Bible, so, but if you ever actually picked up the Bible, for most people, most modern people, you can understand people moving around, interacting. You can understand, even sort of moral lessons, pretty good. Then all of a sudden it'll say, and then out of the sky came, somebody shining like a golden lantern and, in 7 times 7 splendor and things like that. Well, what's going on? In the ancient world, it's not just in a certain way it's true, it's a description. They did have a vision, but they're not just doing some kind of naturalistic, write it down and this is what I saw like it was on a video camera. They're giving you the significance of the vision in images that can be understood. Part of the problem of the modern situation is a collapse of the imagination. So this is just perfectly represented by the blank church, the church that's concrete and a cross and an altar. Why did they do that? Did they do that to destroy the faith? No, they did that to represent the state of the religious imagination. The church with the cross, the altar made out of concrete, is the reflection of the religious imagination of most modern people that you don't want to look at. That's why you think it's ugly. You think it's ugly because, for the most part, that's the state of your imagination, to be frank. And every architect and artist who worked in that work knew that. Because why? Because if you look at the old ancient images, for most people, most of the time, that doesn't mean anything. And it might as well not be there. Now, that's what everybody said in the 20th century when they talked about religious art, that those symbols have no spiritual meaning. And so they should be stripped off and it should be rebuilt. Well, in a certain way, if you're not able or willing or capable or attempting to do the work of spiritual imagination, they might as well be stripped off. Because religious images that don't have any meaning are maudlin in a certain way. Not idolatry, it's maudlin, they're decoration. It's not really what's important about religious images. That's not really what's important about the religious imagination. It's not important that you think the thoughts of God in such a way that they're neat. It's important that they mean. It's important that they make the world mean. And so I don't know how to do that for you except to begin to get you to attempt to think of the world in that way. Go ahead.
Is it important that those things are also beautiful or aesthetically pleasing?
Yeah, but yes. But why is it important that they be beautiful or pleasing? It's important that they be beautiful. Why is it important that, I don't know, that the altar be beautiful and pleasing? It's important that it be beautiful and pleasing because the altar is Christ. It's the presence of Christ in the sanctuary in a certain way.
So it should illustrate divine harmony?
Yeah, in a certain way. It should show forth Christ beautifully.
I think a good way to explain what you're saying is to, tap into the mind of an artist and think with, tap into that right brain out of the...
Yeah, I mean, in a certain way, yeah, I want to say tap into that right brain. But in another way, I want to say, look, like in our tradition will say things like, look, when you see the beggar out on the street, you should see Christ in the face of the beggar. That's not, like, if you try, as you say, if you do that in a left brain way, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Christ doesn't look like, what is it, Christ approximately, 5'7" with disheveled hair and rambling at me because he has schizophrenia? No. But
God bless the poor guy.
But in the spiritual imagination, in the being able to see Christ presencing forth, the beggar is the poverty of Christ. God came down to us, and God, I'm going to use this language evocatively, God humiliated himself in the sense of he's the highest thing in existence. He humiliated himself to come and be meat, flesh, walk around, be kicked and spat on and beaten and broken down into pieces in utter poverty. What is he, a carpenter? A carpenter from Nazareth. Do you know what kind of reputation Nazareth had in Israel? Nothing. It was a nothing town. They say, there's a verse in there, I don't remember exactly, but it's like, isn't this that man from Nazareth? That's not Nazareth like, from the big city. That's not, you mean, like.
So they thought of him as like a hillbilly?
Yeah, you mean that old parable is nothing good comes from Nazareth.
Yeah, does anything good come from that?
Yeah, some word trash town.
Mm-hmm.
And who is it? And God came in that vessel. So when we say see the beggar in Christ, you're trying to see the utter humility of God, the utter poverty of God in the flesh. in front of you. And then when you give alms to the beggar, having apprehended that, you're giving back to God what he's given to you. Not that the beggar's left brain literally God. Of course he isn't. He's a beggar. But the spiritual imagination has begun to put the world together in light of God's word, in here and now. And I tell you, this is really important. I mean, you can do this left brain too. I'm a dogmatic theology guy, so I can just go, well, we have certain obligations. As when one appears and asks, for alms, you give them the alms. And if you don't do it 10 times, that's a grave sin. I can do that. But the question is, look, you're out in the world and you're operating, and how does this spontaneously work? How do you see different? It's not just that you think different. Thinking different will help you to see different. But how do you see different? You come to look at things as images of things. You think about it even this. We're images of God. You're created in the image of God. You would say it's not quite right to say we're a photograph of God. But you would, in the Eastern tradition, you say we're an icon of God. We have icons upstairs. You're in the West, you're a religious image. Do we have it? I think I have Dominic here. Yeah. I have this. It's actually mine. It's an icon. Religious art. It's important. Now, this is actually a little more realistic. Not too much, though. Like, you'll notice about some nowadays you have realistic ones, and this is a little realistic, really, for what I'm trying to illustrate. But you'll even see, it's flat. The proportions are weird. The hand's weird. Why? You want to go, did the medieval people and the ancient people, did they do that because they couldn't draw perspective? No, not really. That's not why icons are like that, with the flat character, and then with the, he's got a star, he's got the halo. It'll usually be because what's important about the image is not this left brain thing of how did it if you were in the room and you were looking at the guy and you could take a photograph of it, how would that turn out but I'm going to do it by hand or by paint. That's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to show what the spiritual eye sees in the figure. You would call that I want to call that the imagination. Unfortunately, in contemporary language, imagination is kind of trivializing. It's not just we make some images. It's what is it that you see here, and in that deeper sense of sight. And you have to begin to navigate the world that way. And Christ tells you this all the time. I'm using visual metaphors, but so when Christ tells you in Scripture, and we'll talk about this again when we get to Lectio, when Christ uses parables all the time, parables are kinds of images. And you go to the prodigal son, the son's gone away. He's asked for his father's given him a beautiful life. He's scorned this beautiful life. He's asked his father, I want my whole inheritance now. I'm going to go, and then he goes out in the world and he wastes all of it on whores and gambling and drinking, and he's humiliated himself off in some pagan country. He has to live with pigs, and he's so humiliated and he's so poor that he says, I wish I could eat the food that the pigs eat, which would be at this time utter slop. I mean, it would be pods and seeds and scrap and their own shit, literally. Excuse the language, but I mean, you have to see the humility, the humiliation that he's come to. And he goes, look, I'm not even really worthy to be my father's son anymore. I'm going to go back and beg to be a servant, because at least his servants eat well. And the father comes out. He sees the son coming. He runs out to embrace him. He has a lamb sacrificed and made ready for eating. All right, that's not just a story about some event that happened. It's not even meant to be an event that happened. Or at least that's a story about in other words, that's a story about an event that always happens in a certain way. Or that's a story about an event that paradigmatically happens, that fundamentally happens in the spiritual structure of the world. And what the point of telling you a story like that for Christ, the point of giving you, would you talk about it as an image? The point of giving you an image like that is so that the world can come to be seen and spiritually reorganized for you in terms of that image. All right? Is this anybody want to talk about this?
Well, is it just like the singing where we can understand it better or recite it better because we sing with it, but by giving us a story or a parable, we can take that same set of images and then reapply them to better understand the parts of our life. Like in the story of the prodigal son, it's also meant to be us, where we squander our spiritual knowledge and upbringing and then come back to the Father, and he treats us in the same way as if we'd been there from the beginning.
Yes. And of course. But it's the whole point is to see it over and over again. To see it over and over again as a fundamental structure of life, and also to see it over and over again as a fundamental structure of this life. I'm doing mystagogy. What's mystagogy, by the way? Mystagogy is initiation into the mysteries. I am now initiating you into the baptism or the confirmation you just had. I'm leading you into this life. I'm leading you into this way. I'm trying to get you to begin to, inside yourself, do what it is you promised to do when you went and did the thing upstairs. Go ahead.
Is the thing you're talking about doing like using our imagination or thinking in figurative or metaphorical ways, it's not an intellectual exercise like children are able to access these things also, or where we have that natural ability, it's innate within us or given by God or something like that.
I mean, yea, that except a man become like unto little children.
Right.
Well, one of the reasons that medieval art in a certain way that things were portrayed in such a simple two-dimensional, not the grandiose, Renaissance era, but is because, if you think about it even today, when we see imagery done in that style, it just automatically, it takes your mind to other worlds. It brings your mind, it's got a psychological effect. But it's really powerful because every man, child, woman can digest it, rather than it being a more complex work of art that's just, where you're only just looking at the art, you're not really, but psychologically it will take you where you need to go much easier.
I mean, almost all religious art that's worth anything does that. Even the Renaissance style, although they're a little weird. Like the Renaissance style starts to introduce, the realism comes to over dominate, but then they start to introduce intricate symbols. Mm-hmm. So that's what you see up in the David.
It was least distracting to the viewer in it, because I remember, I was studying, I went to school for fine art, and we studied all this stuff, and I remember when we went over art of the Middle Ages and early Byzantine art and just all these different art styles and what it meant, and the illuminated manuscripts, and it was really to just not be so complex that you're really just sucked into the image. All you're doing is staring at the image, because thinking about the beauty or the splendor of just the image, rather than to keep it a little simpler, you consider the symbolism. Just exactly what you were saying. Actually, so really, I'm just backing up what you said, and it still applies today.
Actually, one of the interesting things about those illuminated Psalm manuscripts is it's a method of memorization. If you didn't know that, it's part of the mind palace method. So if you want, because you'd only have in a monastery, you'd have one big book, and maybe they might write it down on a piece of paper for themselves, but like ultimately you're expected to memorize the Psalms. And how do you do that? Well, you could sort of do it through repetition, but you were expected to have it clean, like rote. And all the ancient methods have an image method, and so part of doing that is associating the words with striking images. And so that's why you'll have these psalters with like rabbits fighting each other with swords and stuff, because it's something you can fix the words to. I can't do when we do the listening method here. I can't do that with you. But that's also for that method is for when you read the old books. They say, look, after you've memorized it the standard way, that is to say, by having recited it, how do I memorize it in such a way that I can call? Because usually when you do it through the listening method, you have to go in sequence. You have to start with Miserere me Deus secundum magnum. You got to go through it in sequence. And they'll go, well, how do I call to mind pieces of it in any order I want to? Well, then you have to have a more advanced method. And so they would use the structure of the Psalter itself. But that's a little here and there. But it was connected enough to memory that it is connected enough to memory. I thought I'd talk about it. Let's see, we got about 10:40. I'm going to try to get you out around 11 since this is introductory. Let's see. So I've talked about. I'm covering the faculties. I'll cheat and I'll give you the schematic. I've talked about. We've done some memory stuff. We've talked about imagination. Sense. So there's sensation. We're talking about base faculties right now. This is the trick. So there's sensation. Sensation I'd cover sort of more in when we do confession stuff because that's really about purity. But I do want to tell you, you should start to be aware. We'll talk about this later when we get to fasting. But sensation is passive reception of things, through the eyes and ears and nose and all that. You should be aware of how the senses affect you. And the most primitive thing we do to try to get a hold of this is fasting. All right? And I'll tell you, this is just psychologically. We just know psychologically that if you fast, you will begin to be aware of how stuff impacts you sensuously. And in becoming aware of that, you'll begin to be able to get control of it. I didn't know this until I back engineered it later when I came into the faith. So I fast kind of by default. I don't eat very much. I don't like food. I just have no taste for food. I never have. I think my mother basically forced me to withgo food when I was a child from time to time. And so I got used to detaching myself from sense. Like I don't have any, I just don't feel hunger. Or if I feel hunger, I go, I can eat when I feel like it. I did not realize until later that many people can't do that. But what that does, what fasting does for you, is it begins to detach your interior life from its immediate connection to sense. And why is that important? It's important not because sensation's bad or something, but because you need to be able to separate fallen sinful sense from, actual spiritual life, okay? God has begun to purify you. God has begun to lead you into holiness. But how are you going to maintain this life he's begun into you? Well, if it's all mixed up in here, and every time you get a sensation, every time a woman walks in front of you, or every time you see something you want to eat, or every time you run into something you'd like to have, it's all gone. It's not, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time morally. You're going to have a hard time in prayer. You're going to have a hard time in anything. So what you want to begin to do is you want to begin to become aware of how your sensation is operating in you. And when I was a kid, it was this focus on sexual temptation, and that's a real problem. But that's just one thing. Like if you got a problem with pornography sensation, or if you've got a problem with just women going by, or if you've got a problem with, whatever it is, get that in order. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Like if you got a problem where you see food and you have to eat it and you can't disconnect yourself, you get that in order. And in fact, probably should start there because the church directs you to deal with food pretty much directly, immediately, every year, all the time. But I mean, with anything, like if you got to be looking at this all the time, that's a sense problem. If you can't, I remember the first time I went to a monastery. Okay, this is a legitimate experience. I went up to Gethsemane in Kentucky, and by monastery standards, it's a really easy monastery. Okay, I didn't know that at the time, but like in ski, if you've ever been skiing, there's like slopes. The hardest one is like triple black diamond. It's all rocks and twigs and trees and death. and then there's like, and then double black diamond is all rocks and death, and then black diamond, which is like big hills, and then they got blue, it's all just slow beat, and then they've got like green, and it's like bunny slow. It's like and you're going half a mile an hour down there. Well, Gethsemane is like green with some like you could go into you could walk a long time, might get a little difficult. Okay, I got in there. It's very austere. I got in there. I'm in a cell. I'm in the monastic part, which is all stone, in a cell with the with the they chant the Psalms every day, and the food is not bad. But it's plain unadored, not particularly complicated. I'd never been in a place like that before. I made it 2 days before I started to go nuts, and I had to be. I was like, I gotta go do. This is before smartphones. I got in my car. I drove 30 miles to the nearest town. I had to get to the library, get on the internet or something. I was freaking out. So I went back. I could do one more day. It's a 5-day retreat. I could do one more day, kinda, and I was like, I gotta go. And then a week later, I was like, I need to go back there. But like, what's the point? Like, it's this discipline of the senses makes you begin to realize how dominated your spiritual life, your interior life is by getting impacted with stuff. If you've never sorted that out in any way, and you do any kind of discipline of the senses, it's going to become evident to you right away. And we're not doing this for some stupid like pop diet thing. I mean, like literally, just start. If you didn't fast this last Lent or if you didn't fast very well, but you were just doing it a perfunctory way, I suggest get as close as you can to. Here's the hardest discipline we ever had in fasting, instituted by the church. 1 meal a day, bread, salt, herbs. You could use lettuce or something. After 6 p.m. That's it. If you can't handle that, add a small meal after 6 in the evening. Okay? And see what happens. All right? And I'm not telling you this because it's not because the church told you to do it. I'm telling you, see what happens to the sensation. See what happens if you're going to start to get irritated. You're going to start to get irritated. You're going to start to get but lots of things happen with fasting. You're going to start to get active. You're going to get woken up a little bit, and it's going to become immediately clear to you how attached you are to your sensuous life. And I'm not saying this in some way because it's bad to eat or something. I'm saying this because you need to be aware of how these sensations mess with you so that you can begin to get them in control and clean them up. Go ahead.
How does how does exercise and things like that fit into what you're talking about?
So the reason I say fasting first is because that's what Christ says, basically. And because it's easy. It's easy not easy as in it's easy, but it's easy as in it's easy to start. You don't got to get a gym membership. You don't got to, even if you're 85 years old, you can fast. But you might not be able to exercise rigorously. But exercise has the same effect, especially once you get to where you have to do it even though you're exhausted. We kind of, in the same way with fasting, we have this problem with fasting where we sort of fast like the guy who comes in and only works out for 15 minutes. That is to say, I'll do it as long as I feel like it, and then I don't do it anymore. Same thing happens with fasting. I'll do my little, my little one less meal a day or whatever it is he does, but I don't feel, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't change anything. Why? Well, it's not rigorous, but why is it not rigorous? It's not rigorous because we know what we're doing. Same thing with the guy who barely works out. I go in there and I lift the thing for half a second and go home and I never get any results.
So is endurance training or like doing pull-ups until failure a kind of fasting, or
I would, because I had,
or does it work in concert with fasting, or
It could. I don't see why not. I'm trying to think. I have to connect this to my own experience. I did martial arts for many, many years, over 10 years, and I did wrestling for over 10 years. And so the closest I would say is that there's that liminal experience where you've been going for an hour and you don't feel like continuing. But I mean, you're on a team and the team will say, we are continuing. In fact, the coach might throw you down. I mean, I had a pushy guy. He'd run us around. If we did bad, he'd run us around the gym for an hour. And if you started to stop, I think they made him stop doing this eventually. But if you started to stop jogging around the gym, he would come up behind you and go. And if you got to throw up, you better jog around the trash can till it's gone and then keep going. And you could stop when you fall over. But is that about like, oh, that makes you such a good runner? Is that? No, it's not about that. It conquers the sensation.
Right.
It conquers the sensation of I have to stop. But think about how many I have tos your sense gives you. I have to eat. I have to look at this woman. I have to go. I have to. Like even I have a sort of instant turn. I have a tip making job. So I mean, I have to make more money. Who says? You understand? And once you begin to become aware of that, you have to understand that, as the Bible says, we're not in battles with men of this world. We're in battles with principalities and power. Every time you have, we're to think in a certain way. We're to think every time you have something like a sensation that you have to, and then it's a sin or a temptation. That's a demon, in a certain way. That's a thing screwing with you. Trying to get you off. But you can't separate that out from ordinary, you are also going to get, things that say you need to do this, but it's right. You're going to get, as it were, communication from God in a certain way. Spiritual sense, the voice of God. But it's very difficult to keep those separated unless you begin to purify the senses. And this is how you do it. And we'll talk about that a little more. We will get to fasting and talk about it more in detail, but I'm trying to get through the basic faculties. So we did memory, we did imagination. I just talked about sensation.
It makes me think of Christ in the desert whenever I hear about it, and fasting in the.
I mean, even Christ goes out and purifies his senses.
Yeah.
In a certain way, he doesn't need to. But as a man, he needs to.
Also, you start hearing all the lies you tell yourself, like when fasting with food, like, oh, maybe I can just eat just this little bit and it'll be fine. Like, it's very bizarre when you start to deprive yourself from those things, what you tell yourself, like how you try to justify your actions.
Let me see. So I've got this, and I don't mean to dismiss, I'm just trying to think. Does anybody know any of the faculties? I've done imagination, I've done sensation, I've done memory. What else? Speech, better. Sight. Well, yeah, but that's part of sensation.
That's part of sensation.
So we'll go. Okay, so now we're into the intellect proper in a certain way. So in the ancient world, and still perfectly valid, Freud still has this image. He just inverts it. The West has traditionally been, and all of our spiritual writers, for the most part, with a little variation, but it's the same, have a model of the intellect as tripartite. And sometimes it's a question of where the parts fit, but it's the same view. It's this idea. You have three parts. This is the Platonic view as well. You have the intellect, which is the leading faculty, the will, or spirit, or heart, and the sense. It's in Scripture as well, but I like Plato's image, and I first learned it this way, so I learned it this way. Plato has it as a chariot.
Well, all those animals represent that. The four animals of the.
Yeah, right.
The lion, the heart, eagle, the spirit.
But right.
And the
But
other two.
I want to talk about it this way.
And the bull is the senses thing.
Yeah, I want to talk about it this way though. So you've got Plato does it this way. You've got a chariot rider, and you have two horses. The chariot rider's the intellect, the guide. He sees what we're doing. You got two horses. Horses don't know what they're doing per se. They can go on, but they don't intellect. And then you got two horses. You've got thumos, which is roughly equivalent to will, spirit. It's the thing that directs. It's the thing that goes after things for their own sake. And then sense, which is this wild horse that goes after anything. It sort of goes after things on the basis of desire. And the chariot rider is attempting to control them. Disorders of the soul on this image happen by virtue of the fact that basically the rider is not in control. Okay? So on this idea, the mind, thought, direction, basically apprehension of the truth, is to be the guiding aspect of the mind. And then this is to be directed to the obedient part of the soul, the spirit, the thumos, the will, which will then control or direct or prod the lower part of the soul, the desiring part of the soul, which often goes after good. I mean, the desiring part of the soul is necessary. You got to want to eat or you will die. You've got to want to drink or you will die. You've got to want to go away from pain or you will die. If you have a disorder of sensation, you can't feel pain, you can't feel pleasure, you can't feel desire for anything, you will almost certainly die. These are necessary faculties. But they also go after all sorts of things that are stupid all the time. So how is that to be conquered? By the will and by the intellect. By the intellect, knowing what's true through reason, but also through comprehension of God, communication with God. And then through the will, which is directed by reason. Okay? So we got through sensation, we got through the lower faculties, we start to talk about the will, we start to talk about the intellect. All right? The intellect is formed, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about spiritual reading. But, and we're already starting when we're talking about memory, but the intellect has to begin to see it. You have to begin to see yourself as trying to come to understand the truth. And not in this narrow instrumental sense of the truth, like as in, what do I need to make $50,000 this year? What do I need so that my tooth doesn't fall out? What do I need so that the siding gets cleaned? Those are very narrow instrumental uses of the truth, and perfectly valid in themselves. But the broader sense of truth is what stuff is, how stuff works, and ultimately we're to see, look, when we're to begin to understand things like God, and Scripture puts it in nice, useful images like He's our Father, it's a family, it's a marriage, it's a communion, it's a body, a mystical body. These are all images that help the intellect to grasp the situation, but ultimately the intellect is to see that not only the whole world, but also us particularly as Christians, and us particularly as Christians in communion with another, are ordered under something in a certain way, and this is to direct our whole understanding of the world. All right? So you're to begin to understand yourself as trying to understand the world under God's order. And when you begin to understand things under God's order in a comprehensive way, then you begin to be able to understand things in particular under God's order. And then you begin to be able to direct the will to act appropriately. So, just for instance, alms don't make a heck of a lot of sense on their own. Or loving your enemy doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense on its own. But when you begin to see how God has ordered things and what He has asked you to do and why He's asked you to do it, it begins to make sense. Why would I give alms? Well, we'll learn later, Christ gives alms as a particular, it's a discipline to begin, it's also to be, you don't only give alms in private, but you're supposed to give private alms. That is to say, Christ says, don't let your right hand know what don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. What does He mean? You're to give it in private. Why? So that you're not showing off. Why? So that you have a private discipline. Why? So that you can get to know God, so that you can get to operate with God in a way that's literally just for you and God. That's to begin to form yourself for you. And what does it do? Alms begin to get you to view possessions as subordinate first to your neighbor, because I just gave them away. But secondly, why? Because because, as Christ said, loving your neighbor is loving God. So you begin to subordinate things. We're turning things around. You begin to subordinate things to the neighbor, to God, so that you begin to reorient your way that you look at things. And that's an intellect. That's not merely a I do it by rote. And that's not merely a I just direct the will to do it. But it's a I begin to understand things differently. Because isn't it the case that ordinarily in the world, as certainly now, we start to think, well, my things and my safety. And even, people will say, I'm not going to get married until I have XYZ things. Well, I mean, in a certain way, that's backwards, right? Like, you don't have, it goes from the old saying, make a house a home, We're going to get this family together and we're going to build a home together to, I'm going to buy a house so that I can have a woman in it, so that, she becomes as if in this sort of way of thinking, another piece of furniture. You understand what I'm saying? That is to say, the order is backward. But it goes all the way like that. I would have the job so that I have the money, so that I have these things. It's as if these things, sometimes they'll be people, or sometimes they'll be, so that I can give to the church, or so that I can give to my friends. Sometimes they just become further items. But that's not the order of things at all, because God's a person. And people aren't things that we possess. Certainly God is not a thing we possess. But once you begin to see that, and once you begin to see that the way we usually think is disordered, you have to begin to relook at the world differently. And then not only will that make sense of things like love your enemy or give alms, it'll make that make sense. Why you give alms? Because we're not thinking in terms of keeping our possessions as objects that we have to preserve, because what's most important is having objects. But what's most important is loving God. Which doesn't mean you can't have things. You can have things when you love God. But you don't love the things. You love God, who's given them to you for his purposes. You understand? But you have to begin to see that way. And if you can't begin to see that way, for everything, none of it, it'll all go away. It was not to say you'll leave the church. I don't care. And at the end of the day, I don't care if you leave the church in the sense of like, if you don't want to do it. But you'll begin to get stuck. You'll begin to make no spiritual progress. You'll begin to go in a loop. It'll begin to get empty for you if you can't at least even see the turn that you need to make. Then when you can make the intellectual turn, you can direct the will. Why is that important? Because if the will's not directed, you're going to go after all sorts of stupid things. You'll see. We'll say this in society all the time. That man is. I admire that man's conviction. What that means is he did some stupid fool thing that he shouldn't do, but he's really dedicated to it. I know he didn't just do that arbitrarily. What is that saying? What is that saying? We say, I don't know. I got a lot of right-wing friends who, admire Mel Gibson even when he does these dumb things. Why? Because he's very convicted when he does it. What does that mean? He's got an iron will about it, but it's not intellectually directed correctly. It's not directed at the correct thing. And there is a certain admiration in it because the will has overridden the sense. You can tell that in many of these cases, but the will is not directed correctly. And so it's important to have conviction, but if there is no reordering of the intellect, and how do we get there? We'll get there, I'll show you. If there is no reordering of the intellect, the conviction's just going to go after any old thing. It might go after sin. It might go after ruin. It might go after the devil. It might just spin around in a big circle. All right. So I think, is there anything, so we won't have any questions on this. And this is just sort of about, right now we're just having a discussion about sort of the basis, the background, the point of what we're doing. All right. Is it a little past 11? 11:04. All right, I'm going to do we have that sheet? Did everybody get on the sheet? Your name, and this is for newly initiated, so you were baptized, you confirmed or something. If you're a sponsor or you're coming back or you just wanted to learn something, I'll get you a book, but I'd like you to chip in. Otherwise, but for everybody who's on here, I'm going to assume that, you have need and I'll buy you stuff, basically. The church might help me, they might not. Oh yeah, this is the text. I've got. Does everybody know what an EPUB is? Does everybody know what ebooks are? You do. I can send an ebook version of it. I'm going to get you a real one. I want Dr. Petrie to have some money, but I can give you an ebook version in the meanwhile. Was everybody getting the email? Okay, I'll send it in the email so that you have it, and then. Who's left that doesn't have it? Doesn't have this book? 1, 2. Who's a couple? So if you're a couple, just put one hand up.
We're good. We're good.
You've got it? You have this book.
I gave her mine.
Well, you need one.
Ebook.
Fine. 1, 2, 3, 4. I need 4 more? All right, because if you didn't raise your hand, you're not getting one, and you need to have one. All right, so I'll get 4 more of those. Let me steal that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Or 4 more will come in. I'll have to look. And then, how many do we have total? So I've got. Okay, that's a couple. Okay, so that's 1. That's 1. 1. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. All right. Are any of you? I don't know how you want to indicate this to be. Are any of you just staying here to be polite this time, and you're not going to come back? Because if you don't want to not come back, tell me now, because I'll buy less books.
Probably no one would dare to say that in front of everybody, right? I'm going to come back.
I'm not coming, I don't like this.
Okay. All right. I mean, look, no, you can be honest with me. You say, look, don't give me a book or something.
Will you let us know if you have to pay? Because I'm happy to pay for my own.
The church is going to give me some. This is alms.
Okay.
This is
Okay.
alms for me. Okay.
Well,
If y'all, I don't care. At the end of the day, if y'all want to throw some money on I don't care. I usually put somewhere in between, I don't know, $250 to $1,000 into this. If y'all want to put some money on the table at the end of the day, I don't care. I'm going to give the receipts to the church. If they want to give me $5, I don't care. If they want to give it, I'm a landlord. I have investments. I'm all right. I'm going to live. Okay.
Well, you shouldn't have announced what you're doing. It should have just, look everyone, there's books here. I don't know where that came from.
Well,
I'm just joking.
But,
I'm joking, Matt.
no, but I mean, I want people. I don't want people to think they have to. Okay. Anyway, let's see. Oh, did everybody put? Not everybody put. Weatherford. What mass do you go to?
I go to the 12 o'clock mass.
So Latin.
And I don't expect you'll find much on my saint. I don't expect.
I think.
You were mentioning,
Oh, I'll figure that out. Then you'll just get anybody who I can't find information. I'll get. You'll just get St. Francis, and that's fine. Chloe, what mass do you go to? English. Oh, I see. Some of y'all did by time. I see how it is. English. I get it now. I'm the silly person. The Southern family, do you English or Latin?
Latin.
Latin. Oh, traditional, right? Okay, everybody will get. So Fulton Sheen did a book with some people that are very well. Everybody who did Latin wanted to get a Fulton Sheen book called "This Is the Mass." It's actually a German book, but Fulton Sheen had the photographs done for it in the English translation, so I like it a lot. Everybody in the English will get "If Your Mind Wanders at Mass." Both of those are, they basically break the Mass down into pieces and then talk about it. So I give it to you so you can go through it. And you could literally sit in there. It's a question of, look, what am I doing in there? It's going to go through it in pieces. And then I'll also talk about other things you need to be doing. Also, everybody will get Guardini's meditations before Mass. So they're saying, you go up there and say, come 30 minutes before Mass. What are you doing? In a certain way, you're getting prepared, but you have no idea how to do that. So I'm going to give you Guardini's meditations before Mass. Not a very expensive book. It's got 32 chapters in it. They're about 10 to 20 minutes of reading. So you can go upstairs 30 minutes ahead of Mass, open up Guardini's book, do a chapter, pray, sit in silence for about 5-10 minutes. Done. You've done some preparation. All right? That'll help you. Let's see, what else? I've got a book on confession. I think's okay. I'll look at it. I don't know. I might use it, I might not use it. We'll see. Everybody will get 2 books. You'll get Life of St. Francis by Bonaventure. You'll get Little Flowers by Bonaventure. You get a book pertinent to your saint. You'll probably get a rule of St. Benedict. You'll probably get a rule of St. Augustine. What else did I get, people? There's one other thing I like to get, but I don't remember. I think that's about it. There might be one more thing, because I go a little nuts. But that'll be it. You get a little stack. Oh, and a book on evangelization. Probably Scott Hahn's book. I've given out 2 before, but I don't know. Probably just give you Scott Hahn's book on evangelization. Because we have some, and we'll talk about it when we get to it, but I mean, every Catholic has problems with evangelization, and nowadays every Christian has problems with evangelization because it is, guess what, hard. Okay, so but it'll give you some basic steps. I can't think anything else. Did anybody have any further questions? Talk they wanted to do?
I was going to ask you about a book. I just purchased a book called The Latin Mass Explained, and I can't think of.
Latin Mass Explained is fine.
Is it a pretty good?
It's
one?
fine.
I haven't started it yet.
I try. So look, y'all are good. I try to do stuff from before the contemporary situation. I try to do stuff from the middle of the century, right around the time of the council, because I emphasize continuity liturgically, and the best way to do that is to go back to the idea of what was going on when we reformed the liturgy.
Okay, so the book I got is more of a contemporary.
It's fine.
Modern.
It's fine. It's just in some of the I don't seem to recall a problem with the Latin Mass Explained, but sometimes you'll run into these things where they have these weird prefaces on there that say this stuff or about look how they eviscerated this. Or I'm not teaching you that. You got plenty of stuff online if you want to watch that.
I'm very familiar with that book. I don't see that.
It doesn't have a problem. I've run into some things. It'll sometimes the book will be good and then it'll stick. Taylor Marshall will have a preference or something. Peter Kwasniewski will have a preference or something. And they might do good work here, they might do good work there, and then they'll have something in there that I go, look, I know that's not gonna. I'm not gonna give that to my student. And if you want to look at that, I'm not gonna tell you can't. But there's problems.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I was wondering because I had gotten I purchased that and I thought I wonder if this is a good because I didn't know what the ratings would be on these different books to understand Latin Mass.
Yeah.
I know in the contemporary versus the old.
There's plenty of good stuff. I know that if I get a Latin Mass book from about 1955 to 1965, it's going to be quality. It's not going to say anything weird, and it's going to help you.
Okay.
Whereas if I get one from today, it might be quality, and it might say something good, but it might have some other weird stuff stuck on top of it.
All right. That's
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, and Chris King is out. Okay.
Oh. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. But lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. Amen. Lord, hear my prayer. Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God. May the souls of the faithful, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen. Go in peace. Oh, also, if anybody wants to cheat, Psalm 1 is the it's in the Abbey Psalms and Canticles. It's the Grail translation. It's the Revised Grail translation. You can find it. I'm not going to help you too much.